Welcome back to the Restaurant Growth Podcast by Seven Shifts. And for the last time this year, I am your host, DJ. Don't worry, we'll be back next year. And we're coming together for the last episode of 2021. Today, we have Dan Simpson on the show. Dan Simpson is the CEO of Taziki's restaurant, which with 100 locations and 3,000 employees still managed to have a high retention rate, higher than industry average, and are really paving the way for what it means to be an employer of choice in the restaurant industry. So we get into how they've been able to do that. And I'll give you a little hint. It's with a lot of employee conversations and a lot of getting to know who works for you and what they need out of a career at your company. We also get into a bit of the future of work in the hospitality industry and what something like microshifting might look like. It was an amazing conversation. I couldn't think of a better one to cap off the year, and I hope you enjoy it just as much as I did. Dan, how are you today?
I'm great. Good to be with you in this holiday season.
Yes, you as well. I hope you had an excellent holiday. And there's still more holidays to go. But yeah, just wanted to kind of go in. Dan Simpson, CEO of Taziki's restaurant. Tell us what you and Taziki's are all about.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, great to be here. We like to say at Taziki's that we offer the world a fresh celebration of the Mediterranean diet. Most everybody's familiar with the Mediterranean diet. It's very popular year over year. Not just a healthy way to eat, but really a healthy way to live. And that whole idea is, really about living in community, living an active lifestyle, and then just being intentional about the way that we eat, whether it's like plant-based and adding the right amount of proteins and absolutely a glass of wine to celebrate the highs and the lows of life. And so that's what we're all about, trying to offer nutritious and delicious food for the whole family. One of the great things about Taziki's is just that. Our typical customer might be a working professional female who brings her kids and her husband or coworkers. But people come to Taziki's and they stay for life, which we're excited about. But Taziki's is also, we take a lot of pride in. It's a place where a lot of people come for a job and they stay for a career. And so it's a place where they're makers, they're creators, right? They take a lot of pride in the food that they make because they see it starts with whole ingredients and they see how amazing it tastes for our guests. And then lastly, I would say we really strive to be a part of the community. No different than the essential qualities of a school and a church and the nonprofits and the businesses. Taziki's wants to be a place that brings people together around great food. And we're, as a company right now, we're approaching our 100th unit. We're in 17 states, originally in the Southeast and growing out from there. And we have come through the pandemic, not just surviving, but thriving. And we're excited for all that lies ahead.
How many employees would you say you have across all of those locations?
Yeah, across all, there are over 3,000 employees.
It's incredible.
Yeah, you think about, particularly, we always say, like many do, like we're in the people business or we're only as good as our people. And that's true. It takes on new meaning when you are faced with furloughing people. You're faced with being the provider of income for people's families, their lives, their kids, their dreams. It's a lot of responsibility. And we're really grateful that even where we had to do some select furloughing, we were able to bring essentially everybody back on board very quickly, and it stayed in that posture the whole time.
It's amazing. And being able to, unfortunately have to furlough those folks, but being able to bring everyone back, you've been able to kind of keep staff and retain your staff at a pretty high rate, higher than industry average, even through the pandemic and into today. And how does that begin? Where do you start? And what do you think, what separates you guys from the rest when it comes to keeping staff around? And how do you start to kind of learn about your staff and get to the point where you can have that high retention?
I would say, first of all, it starts with our culture. One of the things when I joined the brand, and Keith and Amy, the founders, we talked a lot about, who are we at our best? Like what was in the heart and the mind of the founders when they started the brand, and who are we now as we look to hire people and add people to our teams? Because everyone has a culture, just some cultures are not defined, right? So we defined our culture that first of all, we want to be a culture of connection, and then collaboration, and then the kind of people that embrace a challenge, that focus on the details, and we're committed to keep it fresh, to keep it relevant. Those 5 guide points help us be all that we can be and hire the right kind of people that are bought into that sort of ethos. And, I think over time though, right, it's a lot of people to stay engaged with. So I'd say from like a macro to micro perspective, we are trying to be smart about asking questions. And so you can look at everything from like our data from our platform, our tools platform called Employee Maintenance, where we track all of our employees, when they started and turnover and those things. We took all that data, their addresses, and then we have a really great technology platform called eSites. We put those things together and actually can help us see where our staff live.
Yep.
over time where we're hiring from, and that helps us actually go back and to engage the parts of the community that maybe it's because it's along a convenient, interstate or bus line or something like that. And then we survey our staff, right? Just ask them. Good leaders don't need to guess from an ivory tower. Let's just talk to our staff. Surveys are a way to do that. In the last several months, we've asked them about why they stay or why they might be tempted to leave.
Yeah.
And as you and I have been talking about a little bit offline about, it does come back to, wages, and it comes back to maybe a existential change of direction in life. It comes back to childcare. It comes back to both some very practical and some very directional reasons. And I would say last but not least, on a most micro level, is literally just sharing a meal with everyone from our area supervisors to our managers to our crew staff, and just asking them what matters to you. And I think this is the real gift through the great resignation and labor crisis, is that has forced us to be, I think, what we want to be, which is to start interviews like this. Tell me about your family, and tell me about your life priorities. Tell me about your kids. When do you need to pick them up and drop them off? Tell me about what matters to you outside of this job. And let's see if we can work out a schedule that works for you, instead of it just being, here's my schedule, take it or leave it, because there's 10 people standing behind you.
Right.
And so that's it from a macro to micro perspective, as how we kind of stay engaged with our staff and their needs.
That's awesome. And I think it's so important talking to the staff. Like you said, you're doing surveys and you're starting interviews with those kind of questions. What kind of makeup is your staff? Is it mostly kids? Is it parents? And where have you kind of found the common ground between, because you can't just make one change that impacts everybody. You kind of have to figure out, especially with a staff of that size, but even with a smaller one, you kind of have to make pinpoint adjustments for depending on who works for you. So what kind of ways have you figured out, and how do you kind of segment that?
Yeah, I think correct diagnosis is key if you want the right remedy. And here's where there's a little bit of a gift that we all have in our organizations if we just look at this, which is think first before our staff, think about our customers, our guests, right? Yeah. We go to great lengths to deploy all this technology for customer segmentation and mosaics and all this analysis to figure out exactly who they are and what makes them tick and what they value, and then how do we change our marketing to appeal to them? What if we take the same discipline of marketing and advertising and we apply it to our own staff? Let's first start by breaking them into segments so we can truly understand their different values and needs, and then deploy the right fix. So in our case, what we discovered are three major buckets that make up the majority, right? So one might be basically the younger millennial or generation we, and they would look at this job primarily as a part-time job when they're in school or right after school, or might be a stepping stone for them. And then you've got single parents or working parents, but that includes a lot of single parents. And they're trying to juggle a life that involves childcare and some of those other barriers we talked about. And they are more thinking that this is moved from a job to a career, but they need it to be a career they can believe in, right? With upper mobility, flexibility, et cetera. And then the last group is, we also proudly employ a lot of first generation Americans. We have a lot of Spanish speaking and immigrants and refugees from a variety of different countries that come and have been a key part of our success from the beginning. And so if you break our staff into three buckets, that would be primarily their buckets. Yeah. When we ask each of them separately, what would make the difference for them? And we found three very different answers. So first of all, the younger staff were very influenced by what I would call the Uber effect, right? Yep. They know that they themselves have already experienced, or their friends are experienced, that they can download an app, apply for a job, get screened, get approved, be working that day, get paid that day, get affirmation throughout the day, and manage their own schedule. Yeah. And they could be walking away with $1,000 of income per week, and they've got a job that generates, $50,000 a year. So with that mindset and expectation, what we realize is that most restaurants are not really built for all that, but offering things like our partner work stream, where we can have text to apply, streamlining that process. We're working on an initiative to be able to offer same day pay for those employees as a new perk next year. And so paying attention to those particular values, that more instant mindset. The next group will be paying attention to flexible schedules for childcare, will be a 401k and retirement benefits to help people see that we're invested in their long-term, not just this schedule. not just these 7 ships, as you say.
Right.
And then you look at our Spanish speaking or first generation American, we have invested into a platform called NGen. We've had some great initial success, but basically takes a staff member who speaks any language and teaches them English, right? And while we see value across a variety of different languages, we know that sometimes a language barrier can be a barrier to advancement, and we don't want that to be the case. So there are more things we're doing, but I think you got to start by making sure you're just to be in the game. You got to pay your people well. They need a living wage, they need a fair wage, they need an opportunity to advance, and to be, paid performance bonuses based on their contributions. Like that's just to get in the game. Then these 3 initiatives for these 3 groups I just spoke to is really how we're trying to pay more attention to our staff.
Yeah. So you're saying kind of beginning with that kind of blanket, there are things that will apply to everybody, wages, scheduling, and then kind of going from there. Once you kind of, like you said, table stakes, diving in and saying, well, who works for me? Because you might not have any, there may not be any first generation Americans working for you, depending on the area that you're in. There might not be any kids working for you. So some of that stuff might not matter to the people that work for you. I guess moving on from there, kind of talking about retention, you're not going to be able to keep people around if you're not hiring. Like none of these things are going to matter if you don't hire right from the beginning.
Right.
I just want to kind of pick your brain a bit. What are you doing in terms of recruiting and hiring that you're making sure that you're bringing the right people in from the very beginning to kind of fit your values?
And I'll go back to that analogy with marketing and advertising, right? In the same way that when you have a struggling restaurant or a restaurant wants to grow, we don't go invest in the accelerator of marketing advertising until the operations are good, right? You want a great operation. Otherwise, we're just exacerbating the problem. But on top of great operations, the right marketing investment can make a big difference. Same thing with staffing, right? We want to focus first and foremost on retention and then recruitment in that order. We want to obsess over so one of the things we do, right? We start by a clear communication, honest communication with all of our staff from the get-go about what the expectations are. So we use the WHO method, great book, lays out a methodology for articulating very clearly for the expectations. It basically establishes a scorecard of what every person's mission is, what their responsibilities and their competencies are. So when we engage with them on a daily basis or annual evaluation and anything in between, it's not subjective. It's based off of winning looks like this. So give people a clear strike zone, and most people want to really meet or exceed the expectations if only they're clear. So let's just make them clear. And then, beyond that, it's give them great training. And usually if people have the right attitude and, the right aptitude, we can provide the right training. So we've invested in a platform we call Create. It's based on a program out of the Tampa Bay area called Kiwi. And we have gone to great lengths to build multi-language training that really appeals to our staff and helps them move through the various levels of their progression of their career. Those are some of the key pieces. And then along the way, it's if you invest in great people, then they are your best resource for referrals to their friends, their classmates, their roommates, their colleagues. Because only if it's a great place to work, they're going to want to naturally, not just for the couple $100 referral bonus, but they're going to naturally work around more people they love, right? And that's one of our aspirations, is that Taziki is a place where people love to work. And anything short of that, we feel like we failed. And that goes back again, full circle to culture. That cannot just be a mantra or an aspiration. It needs to be, does the manager know their staff and care about their staff inside of work and outside of work? Are they honest with them and not only praise and giving more opportunity to the A players, but coaching up the B players and confronting the C players to make it very clear how they can not get stuck in that doghouse, right? It's all about clear and kind of heart-centered communication.
Absolutely. We talked a lot about, the difference between a job and a career. And I think, the kind of initiatives that you guys are doing is really kind of making that separate. Hospitality is a career in most parts of the world other than here in the United States. But how do you kind of make up that gap?
Yeah, I love that you and some others are raising this contrast about how other parts of the world just think about their workforce in the restaurant world, right? And because I think it's something that we need to consider once again. I think it seems to be something about Europe and other parts of the world where they hire full time, they pay wages to keep people, they give them retirement benefits, because the whole gig from the beginning has been about a long-term professional level job, and you got to pay for that.
Yeah.
Versus in America, I think our vastly entrepreneurial spirit, and that everyone is starting at the bottom and everyone's trying to race to the top. That mindset has really informed this idea that there would just be this, endless amount of part-time jobs that would just move on. And I think maybe in a QSR world, that still can work just fine. I think when you elevate to a fast casual, in our case, kind of an elevated fast casual that has some of the benefits of even fine dining, as far as the quality of the food and quality of the service, that becomes more challenging, right? And so some of these idea of the like micro shifting is possibly what our future looks like, something that would create a tremendous amount of pressure for relative to the complexity of one's menu and prep required. So I think the first thing is, before we rush in to solve the problem, I think we do need to stop, have time of self-reflection, and say, okay, that maybe the things that got us here are not going to get us there into the future. And so that, I think we need to actually start by, before we get to staffing, is start with the core menu and the format, the guest experience, and say, all right, well, perhaps we can still provide a great experience, but have a simpler prep that would require either less people or less training. And so that's a process we're investing in right now. We have through all of 2021 and the first part of 2022. And we're really want to stretch that. I think after that, then you got to look at everything from your actual menu to your supply chain to your equipment and everything in between. I think beyond that, then we have to look and say, okay, what is the ideal makeup, the core makeup of a staff? You clearly, I think we've all adopted this. You have some full-time managers, maybe APMs. One tactic many have deployed during this time is actually expanding the roles and the number of people that we actually employ full-time. It's kind of a move towards that European model a little bit.
Yeah.
And we've had to adjust benefits likewise. And so now, what we're going to have to figure out is, okay, what are we left with then? Is there enough, if we could reduce our labor and prep by say 20%, is there increase the number of full-time employees? Is there enough part-time labor there for us to pull from? Or do we have to go all the way to micro shifting? Do we have to go all the way to people that are, looking for the Uber version of restaurants, and they just want to pick up shifts here or there? Very painful for restaurants, but I can see why very appealing for some staff, at least for a season of life.
Right.
So I think, unfortunately, right now, there are more questions than answers. Although I think this is a time we shouldn't fake clarity and shouldn't fake certainty when we don't have certainty. We have prolonged uncertainty. And so what we need to do is make some adjustments and be willing to keep iterating as we go, be willing for some ideas that maybe blow our minds a little bit, like micro shifting, and be open to where both our guests want to take us towards omni-channel and more digital and more delivery, and also where our staff want to take us, what they're willing to contribute as a labor force. And we're going to have to be flexible, more flexible than we've ever been.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that kind of the restaurants themselves are not going to be dictating how it goes in the traditional way of there's still going to be those traditional sit down restaurants where you go and the server takes your order and the way it's always kind of been. But I think, like you said, the diner and the restaurant employee are both kind of pulling it in a very different direction. I just want to dive a little bit into micro shifting for those that are not familiar. For my understanding, it's similar to if I were to sign up for an Uber or DoorDash and I can pick up, there's someone in my neighborhood that needs something delivered. I can just pick that up and say, I'm going to make this delivery. I'm going to make whatever money. Or Uber, if someone needs a shift, it's up to me if I want to choose to pick that up or not. And kind of bringing that idea into the restaurant industry, we're saying Taziki's needs someone to work from 3 to 8. I'm a trained, food service professional. I've never worked there before, but I can hop in and make some orders and serve some guests and kind of hop out and cash out that day. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, I think I've heard two different approaches to this. And one is more like what you just said, is basically is leveraging the gig economy mindset and existing network and creating a platform similar to Grubhub or Uber Eats that would allow this workforce, a marketplace for this workforce, to see and pick up shifts that they're pre-qualified for.
Yeah,
That's one way. Now, before we go on to the second way, there are some levels of that, right? There's I would go back to the complexity of one's menu, and the task at hand is really what dictates the viability of that idea. So if you're talking about cashier, probably the easiest, or dishwasher, those two probably bookends, they're probably the most transferable skills. If you have, say, been certified on whatever it is, Aloha or Micros or Toast or Square or fill in the blank, then that is a somewhat transferable skill, although the setup of these various platforms can make that be, more or less easy. Dishwasher, in most cases, is going to be pretty transferable. It's what's in between. However much that's as simple that a robot could do it, or it requires a Culinary Institute of America chef to do it, and everything in between. Okay, so that is the problem. Why, again, I would say that model works probably better for QSR, and the more advanced you go up the chain, the less. Okay, the other way to think about this would be, well, if most restaurants have, say, 100% to 150% turnover every year, this churn creates a dynamic whereby a whole bunch of people have already worked at your restaurant, say Taziki's, and they already know how to do some or multiple tasks at Taziki's. And if they were not just to leave and never see them again, but leave, maintain some low level of certification, and join a broader network, this marketplace of gig workers, essentially, then I could access them again. I could tap back into that former employee network, if you will, right? And so if you think about that, now, that might solve a little bit of a problem, because now they can not only have worked at said point of sale, but now I know that they've worked on the roll-up station at Taziki's, and I know that maybe with fewer hours of training, I could get them up to speed relatively quick.
Yeah.
But one must need to ask, well, why did they leave in the first place? And of course, and why would an employee want to always be an attempt to hire mode? Why would what would be the advantages over that versus maybe you're shopping around for a while to find the right landing spot? That makes sense to me. But then eventually, don't you want to find a great culture that pays really well, that appreciates your work and empowers your personality and your future, right? Eventually, it seems to me that most anyway would want to have a landing spot. So I'm not sure about the viability of that long term. We're going to find out. But I think those are the two rationales of how some early start companies are thinking about this.
Yeah, and it's a super interesting concept, and I think there's even another way to think about it too would be, and maybe you can speak and see if this is something that's kind of being talked about, but maybe you're in a college town or an area with a lot of kids, and maybe instead of having 12 employees, you have 30 people that know what they're doing, and maybe they can only work 5 hours a week, but that's kind of how you make up that gap. I was talking to my brother, and he's an RA at his school, and he's like, I can only work 10 hours a week. He's like, what job's going to hire me for 10 hours a week? I was like, I honestly don't know, but micro shifting may be the future of that, where it's, I've got a little bit of time and I want to work a little bit, so I can do that.
Yeah, that's right. I actually have, it's funny you say that, I have a firsthand experience. One of my first forays into the restaurant space was launching and managing 6 different restaurants. Taziki's was one of them as a franchisee. And it was on a college campus, and we we accepted meal plan as a form of payment, and we had no choice but to adopt micro shifting. And it was, well, I got classes in 5 hours available to you, or 6 hours. Now you lose a lot of efficiency. We had to be really creative, piecemealing together, but there was no other option. And so we made it work, and perhaps the future involves some of the same challenge.
Absolutely. And I think like you said, we have to be really open-minded when it comes to the future. And it's definitely not going to be the same way it was. And I mean, micro shifting, I think, is one of those things that kind of, you have to be willing to have your mind blown to accept. But, the more you dive down and the more you kind of think about it, I think it could be viable in the future.
Yeah. One other thing to add is there's we're talking mostly about the human side, as we should, but there's also a technology side. Much has been made about online ordering and mobile ordering and marketplace ordering and all of that. But it also creates a new pressure on complexity to manage the sophistication of all these inbound orders. And now suddenly we need to challenge ourselves about ideal labor, and challenge ourselves about the systems we use and how much labor, man hours it attributes to each activity, because it is slightly different for a dine-in guest versus a curbside guest versus a catering guest that you're personally delivering, or even a third-party delivery guest. There's now not only the prep dynamic, but the execution, the packaging, and the logistics, whether the logistics is as simple as bringing it to a table, bringing it to a delivery shelf, or getting in a vehicle and taking it all the way there. Now this sort of load balancing or kitchen capacity management becomes as important as anything, because we can make all the changes we want in the world to our menus and to our prep, but if we cannot reflect them in our systems to be more efficient, to take all of these in consideration and maximize the throughput, we will not have created enough good in this new labor dynamic.
Absolutely. And that's definitely something to consider. You don't want to take it too far, and like you can't over optimize to the point where it just kind of doesn't work anymore. And the human element is gone. And I think that's important to keep in mind. But with that, I think, that's about all the time we have for today. But thanks so much for the conversation. I think there's a lot of really forward thinking, awesome ideas. And you guys are really kind of paving the way at Taziki's for what it means to, I think, be an employer of choice for people that are working in the industry. And I applaud you guys for all of that, and excited to see what you do moving forward.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate these kinds of great conversations. Thanks for the good work you're doing as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. And where can folks find you if they want to work for you or just want to explore, see what you're doing?
Yeah, a good place to start is just tazikis.com.
Awesome. Dan, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks again for checking out the Restaurant Growth Podcast. We're glad to have you as a listener. For more great content from 7 Shifts, check out our website and blog, 7shifts.com/blog. You can also hit us on all of the social media platforms at 7 Shifts. Thanks.